Welcome! This video provides an overview of Joint Preliminary Damage Assessments, or PDAs. We will cover some key topics, including what is a Joint PDA and why are they important? When should a Joint PDA be requested? Who completes a Joint PDA? How is a Joint PDA conducted? Where can I learn more? First, we'll provide an overview of the Joint PDA process and explain their importance. A Joint PDA is the coordinated effort by state, local, tribal nation, territorial, and federal authorities used to validate damage data identified during the initial damage assessment completed by a state, tribal nation, territory, or local authorities. This process is used to inform major disaster declaration requests and federal disaster grant decisions. Joint PDAs are used to validate the damage identified during initial damage assessments. They provide key data for decision-making at the state, tribal, territorial, and federal levels. The Joint PDA is part of the larger preliminary damage assessment process, which includes the initial damage assessment followed by the Joint PDA. The larger process helps determine the impact, magnitude of damage, and unmet needs of individuals, businesses, the public sector, and communities. To learn more, refer to the FEMA PDA guide and the PDA overview video. Joint PDAs are used to validate the damage identified during initial damage assessments. They provide key data for decision-making at the state, tribal, territorial, and federal levels. The Joint PDA is part of the larger preliminary damage assessment process, which includes the initial damage assessment followed by the Joint PDA. The larger process helps determine the impact, magnitude of damage, and unmet needs of individuals, businesses, the public sector, and communities. To learn more, refer to the FEMA PDA guide and the PDA overview video. A Joint PDA is requested by a state, tribal nation, or territorial government when they determine that disaster-related damage is expected to exceed their ability to respond and recovery. The governor or tribal chief executive submits a request to their FEMA regional office, which then works with state, tribal, and territorial officials to determine whether a Joint PDA is necessary based on the scope and severity of the reported damage. Who completes a Joint Preliminary Damage Assessment? State, tribal nation, or territorial governments are responsible for working with local emergency managers to assess whether initial damage assessment information is complete and aligned with FEMA PDA standards. They also manage the PDA planning process, review damage identified during initial damage assessments, and decide whether they should request a Joint PDA from their FEMA regional office. After the Joint PDA is complete, the governor will decide whether to request a presidential disaster declaration. Tribal nations can take on different roles depending on how they choose to request disaster assistance from FEMA. They also conduct initial damage assessments and may participate in the Joint PDA. For more information about the flexible options for tribal nations, Reference FEMA's Tribal Declarations guidance. Local emergency managers are responsible for gathering information about the location, ownership, occupancy, and insurance coverage of impacted residents and categorizing damage. They must use initial damage assessments to collect data and submit it to their state, tribal nation, or territorial government officials. FEMA regional offices coordinate with state, tribal nation, and territorial officials to conduct joint PDAs. The FEMA PDA coordinator reports to the FEMA Regional Recovery Division Director, often through the Regional Individual Assistance Branch Chief. After the joint PDA, FEMA regional officials recommend to FEMA headquarters whether a presidential disaster declaration should be made based on declaration factors. Representatives from other federal agencies, such as the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Small Business Administration, and Environmental Protection Agency, may also be part of the joint PDA team, alongside subject matter experts such as engineers. The team visits impacted communities and works together to validate damage identified during initial damage assessments. Representatives from all of these groups form the Joint PDA team. How is a joint PDA conducted? The state, tribal nation, and/or territorial government, with support from the FEMA regional office, is responsible for coordinating with the county or local jurisdiction involved in the joint PDA request to develop a joint PDA plan of action. This plan should include agreement on a methodology for validating specific damage and damage types, a strategy for managing media inquiries with input from the FEMA Office of External Affairs, a list of PDA team members and any specific requirements, such as special considerations that may need additional FEMA support, like language translation or specialized assistance, specific considerations based on whether the joint PDA is for individual or public assistance. For more details, refer to the FEMA PDA guide. The Joint PDA team conducts damage assessments with the goal of validating initial damage assessment data and all essential elements of information and determine the extent of the incident's impact to support requests for individual or public assistance. They are focused on validating existing information, not finding new information. Local authorities help prioritize damaged locations and help find recorded damage. State, tribal nation, or territory officials provide FEMA with an overview of IDA information and the scale and scope of the incident. The Joint PDA team validates damage through visual confirmation, summarizing visits to damaged areas and estimating the damage. FEMA validates and assesses all IDA data and essential elements of information. During the joint PDA, FEMA and state, local, tribal nation, and territorial government staff should regularly discuss their findings. If there are disagreements or questions, they should work together transparently to resolve them and reach a common understanding. Once the joint PDA teams finish their damage assessments, FEMA will provide the state, tribal nation, or territory emergency management officials with a final summary of findings, including the validated cost estimates. The PDA team will hold a final briefing to review all PDA summaries and reach an agreement on damage estimates. The final PDA reports are then submitted to the state, tribal nation, or territorial leadership. Final PDA reports are not an official eligibility determination for individual or public assistance. Additional information may be submitted to expand the impact statement and/or address specific declaration factors as part of the major disaster declaration request. What happens after a joint PDA? After the joint PDA, the state, tribal nation, and/or territorial government reviews the damage information validated from the joint PDA and decides whether to request a major disaster declaration from the president. If they decide to submit a request, they do so through their FEMA regional administrator. Requests for a major disaster declaration must be submitted by the state, tribal nation, or territorial government within 30 days of the end of the incident period. Requests for deadline extensions must also be submitted within 30 days. The FEMA regional office will review the request. The regional administrator will submit a recommendation to the associate administrator for the Office of Response and Recovery at FEMA headquarters. FEMA headquarters program offices and the FEMA administrator will review the request package and include the administrator's recommendation for submission for a final decision to the president. If approved, FEMA works with state, tribal, territorial, and local officials to implement public assistance and/or individual assistance programs to support recovery efforts. If the president approves the request for a major disaster declaration, FEMA works with the state, tribal nation, territory, and local officials to implement supplemental disaster recovery programs. If the president denies part or all of the request for a major disaster declaration, states and territories have 30 days from the date of their denial letter to submit an appeal with additional justifications for why federal assistance is necessary. Tribal nations have 60 days to submit an appeal. For additional details on joint PDAs, refer to the FEMA PDA Guide. Visit FEMA's website for trainings, materials, templates, and other resources to support the joint PDA process. Thanks for watching this overview of conducting joint preliminary damage assessments. For more information, please visit the FEMA Preliminary Damage Assessment website at fema.gov/PDA.